This is Xavier Norris. And the basic synopsis of the podcast, Stochasticity, is it gives a couple different examples of it gives a couple different examples of whenever randomness and very low probability and low odds comes into fruition, and it pretty much comes true. A couple of the examples I wanted to talk about is the first example that it gives about a girl named Laura Buxton who loses a balloon, and she goes and tries to find it. It could land anywhere. They were saying once the balloon reaches up into the air, it goes many, many miles away, and she goes and finds it in a yard with another girl there named Laura Buxton, who is the same age as her. They were both 10 years old, wearing the same outfit as her whenever they met, who they both had a guinea pig when they met, sitting in their lap. So that's just one of the examples where it's like, what are the odds? It makes you think, it's highly unlikely it's highly unlikely even that you meet someone with the same name as you, much less, age, outfit, pets, all that when you meet, and the odds of that happening at all are low, and the odds of you meeting a person like that are that much lower. Another example that it gives is a man who he was retired. I guess he was trying to hit it big on the lottery. He bought 2 lottery tickets, one random day, and then both of those tickets ended up cashing. Jackpot. The odds of that were calculated to about 1 in 23.5 trillion, which is a very, very, very low odds of happening. Especially considering how many people are really in America buying lottery tickets. For that to actually happen, 1 in 23 trillion is absolutely insane. One last example in the podcast that I want to talk about is kind of like a test almost, where there was a group, or there was 2 groups. There was a group that had to flip a coin 100 times, and a group that just had to pick heads or tails 100 times randomly. They could just say, they just went in whatever order they wanted, heads or tails, and then the person who was controlling the group ended up being able to tell which was the trial, which was the actual trial, and which one was the people just saying heads or tails based off of the rarity in the actual trial. So they were saying that there were 7 tails in a row in the group that was actually flipping the coin, and they could tell based off that there was that was the real trial, because the other group had pretty flip-floppy between heads and tails. They didn't have any long runs of 7 tails, but they found out once you do it about 100 times that the odds of getting 7 in a row are actually not very unlikely, about 1 in 6 odds, and even much lower when it goes to getting it 5 or 6 times in a row. So yeah, that's just another example.
This is Philip Park. So a great outside example, besides the podcast, is Moneyball, of people misunderstanding the odds of games and stuff. A lot of times when people think about a sport, they don't think of it having probability. A lot of times it usually does. This movie does have a great example of that, where they basically figure out that it's more of a math game than the random occurrence, how often people get on base or get a hit or even get struck out. They made it all into a mathematical formula to actually calculate how they could win each game. Now, in the movie, they had a lot of drawback from the board, from the fans, from even the players themselves on them calculating these odds. A lot of people like to believe in a game that is random instead of it being just math. But the conclusion of that misunderstanding is that the Oakland A's, they were the worst team before they started doing this math equation. They won, I think it was 23 times in a row, which was unheard of in that day and age. But I'm going to pass it back.
Yeah, so Xavier Norries talking again. And something in the podcast I found quite surprising, which I'm going to tie back to an example I talked about earlier with the lottery. The man who won the lottery twice in one day is just quite insane. Like I said, it's a 1 in 23.5 trillion odds, and to put that into to be able to fathom that, 23 trillion, 23.5 trillion is such a big number that most people can't even process it, and they just think big, but they can't think how big. And when you really kind of wonder what really are the odds of that, it is quite insane. 23.5 trillion. So that kind of made me rethink if this man is winning the lottery twice in one day with calculated 23.5 trillion odds, what they say, anything really is possible, because that is quite literally insane, and that is unheard of, and yeah.
This is Grayson Waters speaking now. This podcast, the Stochasticity podcast, I think was very effective in communicating probability and randomness, but also showed the patterns through it all. They kind of mentioned how people tend to have tendencies, for instance, Kobe Bryant, he had a tendency in basketball where he would be so good 60% of the time, but then the other 40% he would be just kind of mid. But and they use examples how people followed patterns and different things, and how yes, things are random, but at the same time they're not. Like he was mentioning earlier, the how quickly things tend to add up. They use the example of flipping a coin. Well, you flip it once, heads or tails, you have a good chance, but then it adds up over and over and over again, where it's harder to get it in a row, getting tails multiple times in a row. So the probability of that happening adds up vastly. But I think this podcast did a really good way of showing the complexity of it all in that sense, and how things are random, but not as random as we would expect them to be.